Sydney Brunson here on the line with us today. I have known Sydney for like this long, but I feel like it's been this long. She is not only someone that was referred to, we have both a very close mutual friend, but she's one of my sorority sisters as well. So that's where the connection just started from there. And then from there, she's been a huge supporter of the brand on this short period of time. So I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are, what it is you do, and kind of what brings you here today.
Thank you, Sabrina. You said that very well. I'm really excited to chat with y'all today. I know these are like truly unprecedented times, and can't imagine, what folks are going through mentally, emotionally, and physically with this virus. So thank you all for, joining when there are so many other more important things that I'm sure we have going on. So a little bit about me again. My name is Sydney Brunson. I'm a native of Durham, North Carolina, and now here based in Charlotte. I left Durham and went to Howard University and stayed in DC for about a decade, where I started my career in consulting at IBM. So that's kind of where I got my first taste of tech. From there, I left IBM and went to Pinterest in San Francisco, where I served as the chief of staff on the inclusion and diversity team. And now I'm at Microsoft, where I have this very long title. It's Global Engagement, Multicultural Communities and Outreach Leader. What that means in layman's terms. So multicultural, how we define that at Microsoft, is basically communities of color. So that's Asian, that's Indigenous, African-American, Black, and Hispanic Latinx. And I'm responsible for two things for those communities. One, the internal employee experience, so the employee resource groups, professional development, and overall kind of inclusion and belonging sentiments of employees. I'm responsible for the partnerships that we have in support of those communities. So hence the Prevailing Woman, and some details you all will be finding out later about the conference is an example of, how we're able to support communities that are multicultural. And so my job changes day to day, and I'll talk a little bit about that, more as we go through the questions and like really what that means. But I've spent my entire career in tech, which is rare. And I'm under 30, which is also rare to be in this role. So just giving you all that in like perspective and in where I'm coming from and how things have kind of like rocket launched and just took off in my life, which has been nothing but a blessing. But so happy to have y'all here and hope I can provide some tips and jewels that y'all can take back to your work environment.
Nice. I was hoping that you put out there that you are under 30, because that is major. That is super major. I was blown away. I was like, wait, how old are you? You do what? So that's amazing. I don't know if I ever told you, but that is very inspirational to say. So please make sure that you always tell people that you are young and gifted. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yeah, okay, so the Prevailing Woman, everybody is always small business, entrepreneurship. I am one as well, right. But I have a thing for like something about, your traditional 9-to-5ers and specifically corporate America, because what they do works. Like it works. They are a corporate company. They're a big corporation for a reason. Of course, everyone has their issues, but from my aspect, I feel like I can learn so much from anyone in these particular positions. So, and I think it's a really great stepping stone into going into entrepreneurship as well, because you get all the trainings, you meet people, so forth, and it goes on. So, I've encouraged people, whether you have an interest into being in corporate America, that this particular webinar could be extremely beneficial to you and just kind of, the future of your career. So one of the biggest things, kind of the buzzwords that we hear a lot are these, diversity, inclusion positions and women, but I've never been against them because I've seen more women of color be able to climb the ladder due to these positions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of background and some information that I was able to look up, and then we'll go straight into the questions.
Sure.
So a sweeping new study that looked at 329 companies employing 13 million people found that women in the workplace have come a long way in the recent years. But it's not a glass ceiling that is keeping women from the top, but what they call a broken rung on the corporate ladder. These numbers are even worse for women of color. For every 100 entry-level male employees promoted to manager, only 58 Black women and only 68 Latina women are promoted. Sydney Brunson, she's a global engagement, multicultural communities and outreach leader. We gonna put some respect in your name. We gonna say the whole thing anytime we have a chance, okay? Because that's big. This is major. She also didn't put out there this is a position that was created. So she's the first person to ever do this position for a very well-known tech company. But I'll brag on you later about that. So at Microsoft, and is one of the women in this small percentage here to discuss the challenges she faced and how she actually overcame them. So Sydney, before we even kind of just jump and dive into it, kind of how has your day-to-day life changed since the coronavirus outbreak?
Child. It has been, again, a whirlwind, because I don't think anyone ever expected this, let alone really know what to do. So at a company as large and as fast as Microsoft, we're like, every day things are changing. Especially with me, as I mentioned, being focused on multicultural, one of the communities I support is the Asian community. And as you may or may not be aware, there's been like a lot of xenophobia and discrimination and hatred, geared towards the Asian community. So I've been really having to do a lot of mitigation with that, to be honest, right? Like finding nasty and inappropriate memes that are circulating, in different forums and stuff internally, making sure that that community feels, supported and that Microsoft cares. And then also for me, I'm global is the first word in my big title. And so, last night I had a call at 10 p.m. So it's like, really, I'm working on global time. Which I don't know if anybody's ever been that experience, but it is both a blessing and a curse. You learn a lot, but then you also you really work 24 hours. And so I haven't had the traditional 9 to 5 that I signed up for, because it's kind of hard to say it's 7 o'clock why I'm not responding. It's like, what you doing? You at home. So you should be responding. And so that's really, I think, been the biggest change, is like a strong emphasis on the Asian community, which typically in tech, they're overrepresented. So oftentimes we don't think about Asians when we think about diversity and inclusion. But right now, most especially, is a really important time to protect that community.
Yeah, I can see that. Never thought about that, because there is a lot going on targeting, them. And it's no different than like when 9/11 came around, like any of them, like Muslims. They just were totally outnumbered. And I had several friends, and they sometimes were frightened to go places because they just felt like everyone would kind of turn their head when they walked in the room. So could definitely understand that. Can see you being extremely busy with that. So you're young, you're a woman of color, and I'm sure you have encountered a situation where you felt looked over or underestimated due to these particular factors. So can you tell us about a time that happened and kind of how you handled it?
Absolutely. It's so funny. I get this question in a few different ways when I do different speaking engagements, and I always come back to this one incident because it was so crucial and critical in my career. I think if I would have heeded or listened, to the haters, then I might be in a different place. So essentially, as I mentioned, I started my career in consulting. And when I was at Howard, I majored in journalism. So again, this is all God. Like I really shouldn't. I don't have on paper, right, coming out of college or anything before that, like the credentials to be in tech or to be in this type of role. So started in IBM in one of the entry-level programs that a lot of corporations have. And coming up, had a very difficult client. I was actually working with the TSA, and it was just difficult. Government work, if anybody's ever worked in the public sector, is a whole other type of beast of its own. And so I was really struggling. I was the only IBMer on the project. I was like 22. It was like maybe like my first year out of school, and it was just hard. And it wasn't hard because I wasn't competent. It was hard because I was placed on a project that didn't fit my background. So it was a technical role. I was working with engineers and network folks who basically, when you walk through a checkpoint of the airport, all that stuff that you see and can't see, that's what they took care of. Again, journalism major, that I don't even know how I got on this project. And so a senior partner at IBM actually told me, who was the reason why I got on the project in the first place, which I won't even go down that story, said, when I expressed to her, you know, like, hey, this isn't really working and I'm having a hard time, she said, well, maybe consulting isn't for you. And so you can imagine, you know, being 22 years old, a Black girl, having imposter syndrome, already feeling like, I don't know if I should be here, if I'm really doing the right thing. It crushed me. It like really crushed me because I was doing the best that I could. And to hear that from another woman, and in this case, a white woman, that at the time I thought, okay, we're women, we're in this together. It was really jarring. Because this program is all about development and skill building, and that's not what I received. And so really from that moment, I decided, okay, well, maybe it's not. And what I did is that's literally the pivot that I made into getting into diversity and inclusion work. And so I took on a role and I became like the HBCU and diversity recruiting strategy leader for IBM for the same program I graduated out of. And then that just kind of catapulted everything. And so I think a few things happened in that situation that happened to a lot of Black people. And I will particularly say Black in this case, other than people of color, is that people, you know, minimize your work. They don't give you the credit that you deserve. You're perceived differently. And my clients had zero problems. So it was just a personal issue, and that she felt like this little Black girl didn't deserve the spot she was in. And so, like I said, that issue I could have very easily, like said, and left and went and did something else more in like the journalism field or with my degree. But I kind of took it as a moment where like, okay, that's what you're saying. And I also hate it here. So let me find another way to kind of make, you know, a right turn and figure this thing out. And then from there, that's literally how I got into the diversity inclusion space, is because she told me
that.
Yeah.
So you basically kind of took a negative feedback per se, or do you think that what she said actually was beneficial, because look at where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight for sure, it's beneficial now, but I think that her, and as anybody in senior leadership, right, like you're supposed to be coaching, and if you're anybody 1 year out of college, think about where you were, like you don't know much about anything. So that the expectation is not for you to be, you know, an expert. It's for you to just be able to learn. And so I think that, yes, it was a blessing in disguise, but also sometimes I wonder if I would have stuck with consulting, right, like what it might have been like. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword is not the right word to say there, but it's kind of like I get it. It's pros and cons, right? Like this happened and it worked out for me, but I also really liked consulting as well. And I always wonder, like, what if I would have stayed that route?
You know, not to get off track, but I used to play basketball in high school. And I was pretty good. Like, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say, you know, it's hard to say that you were good or bad at something, but I actually was pretty good. And I got discouraged because I was a girly girl and I still wanted to, like, wear makeup while I played basketball. But my coach was like, no. So teenager, I was like, I ain't playing no more. It was a big thing, like made the newspaper, star basketball player, quit playing basketball. No one knows why. So then, so I didn't do the summer program. So then when the season came back, I went to try out, and she cut me from the team. Had this meeting with like me and my parents, and basically was just like, you need to learn that you can't just walk away from things just because you don't like something that you hear, and you need to like basically, or because you don't like the way that something actually is. So I feel like this is a good, and this was my senior year. She's like, it's a good learning lesson for you when you go to college. I mean, I had schools looking at me and everything. So still, so in the moment I was mad because I'm like, now I got to pay for school and so forth and so forth. But so many great things came out. I would have never went to the school that I went to because I was considering another university, and wouldn't have the life I have now, the husband, and, you know, different things like that. So it's always like a silver lining in anything that you have. I mean, I'm thousands of dollars in debt for student loans, but beyond that, I have a happy life because I would have been miserable at that school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I totally, like, for me, like, that's why I said, like, blessed, like, always, because I really believe that, like, God ordains your path. And, like, if you listen and you follow, like, your intuition and, like, it'll direct you. Like, Avon was already planned out for you. Like, that was already written, right? And you just, that step.
I didn't even know.
And you didn't even know it. And same, that's how I feel like Microsoft, all these things were written for me. It was I just had to stand in it. And I think that that's, you know, a very hard thing to do when you are younger, right? It is that confidence of stepping into the unknown, and at all ages. Like, sometimes I get scared. Like, leaving Pinterest to go to Microsoft was scary. Like, leaving San Francisco, the mecca of tech, I really was like, am I doing the right thing? Leaving IBM and consulting, am I doing the right thing? But he's never failed me. And I just continue to try to just lean in and just trust that, like, I can do this.
Nice. So, and I think this is a good segue into our next question. And ladies, if you all have any comments or questions as we're kind of talking through, please make sure you drop them in the chat box. But so with any situation though, granted, there's a silver lining to it. There's a part that we play in it as well. And a lot of times it can be the plaintiff, and sometimes it can actually be the defendant in it as well. So do you feel that women actually play a role as to why we cannot climb the corporate ladder?
I would say yes and no, right? Like, there are obviously systemic factors, especially for Black women and women of color, right, that we don't have any control of, right? But outside of that, absolutely. I think sometimes we are our own worst enemies. I think about, you know, crabs in the barrel. Like, sometimes it is hard. I often find that some of the biggest persecutors or difficulties that I've had in corporate America have been with other women. I think that we, you know, just we're wired differently in how we think and approach situations, and don't always approach things objectively, right, and with an open mind. And this is just a blanket statement, but yeah, I absolutely do. I think that women often, and it's, again, not just our fault, all the things we receive from the media and all these images and things that are portrayed on us have to do with how we unconsciously process things, but I do think we have to take an active role in our careers. Like, that was something that was really important to me, is that I didn't want to become a victim. Like, right to that whole situation I just said, I could have been like, woe is me, she said it wasn't right for me, you know, could have did the HR thing and fought it and was like, you know, this is why, and then me telling the story, this is why I'm not in this position because she held me back. But it was like, I have to take the front seat and the driver's seat of what I want to do. And so you gotta, how can I move you out of the way to get what I need? And I think that it's sometimes hard for women to have that same assertion. I know I really had to work on, like, apologizing. I used to apologize all the time at work, and just be more demure because I felt like I needed to be a bit smaller to stand taller. And now I absolutely not, like, I don't apologize unless I'm really sorry about it, and just learning these things. But I think that sometimes that if we as women focus on us as individuals and what we want and try to, like, put blinders on the other things that are happening, it can help us.
We had a comment that came through. She said that I'm my own worst critic. It's been hard to come out of that. So if you can kind of talk a little bit about, like, you know, that imposter syndrome, essentially, assuming that also potentially plays a role too as to why we can't climb the corporate ladder as well, right?
Absolutely. I am literally, I have this thing right here. I don't know if y'all can see it, but it says on my desk, hold on, I've got to overthink about it, because I am a serial overthinker. Like I will send a text and then be checking every 5 minutes. Like, did I say something? Did I offend anybody? Like I'm very sensitive, which is different than how I portray myself. So absolutely, I beat myself up all the time when other people think it's brilliant. And I think that that's just, and maybe this is one of the things, the pandemic, that I've been trying to do is like spend more time with me, right? And think about like my inner self and like working on how I think about me and like affirmations. Like when Being Mary Jane came out and she was like doing the post-its like all over the mirror. I had like a face that was me, and like writing affirmations in the morning. I really don't grab my phone first. Like I try to like meditate and have moments. And I think that that is what kind of gets me out of that. I know that I'm my own worst critic. And so I try to be conscious of, this is negative self-talk. Like you're doing this to yourself. Don't think about, it may not have gone the way you wanted to, you might have changed, write it down and think about how to do it differently. There's nothing you can do to change the past. How are you going to change it moving forward? And I think that women do that often, again, trying to be less assertive and more conforming, which usually does not help.
Let's see. Jakia said, affirmations are good. Eric Thomas talks about this all the time. I'm not familiar with Eric Thomas.
The hip hop preacher. He yells, he talks real loud. He's good. He actually came to our Blacks at Microsoft conference last month. But yeah, I think affirmations are real. Like what you speak, like life and death's in the power of the tongue, like manifestation. I believe in all of that. So you have to talk to yourself, be nice to yourself. Like you should be the kindest to yourself more than you are to other people. And that's something I've had to learn. Like, does this cost me like betraying myself in order to do whatever it is? And if it does, I try not to do it.
Nice. I have to make sure that I check him out because everyone is saying that he is good. Ladies, please make sure that you are dropping those questions and comments in the thing. I know my computer just went out on me.
Oh no.
Like in the middle.
I have the question if you want me to read it. I have it up.
Please.
Yeah.
Sorry. This never happened.
So you wanted me to ask, well, you were going to ask me, how can companies clear the way for more women to climb the corporate ladder? So a few things. So I'll continue to say this. I think that women, just like people of color, are often put into buckets. And I really, in my role, try to focus on like intersectionality and the specific communities, right? So the challenges of Black women is very different for Native and Indigenous women, is different than Asian women, is different than Latinas. Mm-hmm. So I'll maybe speak about this on Black women in particular, because that's how I identify. And I think one of the ways is like better understanding us as a people. I think that, code switching is so real, and that's also something I had to stop doing. I think that Black people, and especially Black women, aren't given the privilege to show up as their authentic selves at work. Like I remember being afraid back when I used to wear sew-ins, trying to change it out over the weekend so my white counterparts wouldn't ask how my hair grew and then went short and came back again, in a myriad of ways. And how you show up, your speech, what you talk about, like all of these things. And so if you're able, you have to think about how much mental energy that takes today. When I should have been worrying about my work, I was worrying about, fitting in and trying to conform. So I think companies really have to, that is what inclusion is supposed to be, that you're able to come, bring your whole self, the person that they hired you to be, and do that to the best of the abilities. I think that corporations owe folks that, and not, having this cookie cutter model of this is what it looks like. And if you don't fit into this, then you are not, the right fit. I think that companies lose a lot of great talent because they are looking for people to kind of fit into one mold. So that's, I think, the biggest things. Having role models. So and it's funny. So when I told you I started at IBM, the chief technology officer, now shout her out, Gina Lofton, was at IBM, and she was one of my first mentors. She went to A&T. She was from North Carolina, and we just had like a major moment. She was an AKA. I forgive her for that. But she was so inspirational. And now she's at Microsoft. And so two things in that story, I think that one, role modeling. So I was always able to see Gina, like when I was just, a first level consultant, I knew that I could be a CTO, right? Because I saw it. And that saying, it's like, it's hard to be what you can't see. I think that that's really important to make sure that companies are hiring folks at the senior level that look like the lower rungs. It's, as you see, there's a lot of university recruiting that happens, and often you'll see more diversity at, you know, the entry level. It's once you get up higher and higher, where people of color, and especially women of color, start disappearing. And I think if they sit more at the top, right, they're able to influence. You know, those conversations are very different when you're in those type of boardrooms. They're able to bring their perspectives. People are able to see maybe a sew-in change, and so they get it when they see it in the little first year, like me. And also the other thing with Gina that was important is that, you know, recognizing that for most industries, it's kind of a small little ecosystem. So who would have thought that 7 years ago we worked together at IBM and we will be back together at Microsoft? And so I think companies need to be aware of that. How you treat people like will carry whether they stay with you or not. And it's important to make sure that you're protecting the retention of people, like keep them there. It's expensive to hire people. So you should be fully as invested in keeping them there for whatever that might look like. And particularly for tech, let me just look back at the question. I think another way for women to climb the corporate ladder is that everything just can't be in San Francisco. So I don't know if you all have ever been in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco. But
I have.
It's beautiful to visit, cool and all that.
That's it.
3% Black and is the most expensive city in the US. So when you think about the wealth gap, right, and what it for a Black person to move their life, likely from the East Coast or the Southeast, to go all the way to a place like San Francisco, where you'll be like me, it'll be 2-3 days before you see another Black person outside of work. Like, people don't understand how that feels. And it's like, why, yes, I might get a lot of money, but is it worth like my livelihood? To your point, like, I'm never gonna get a husband if I'm out here. There are no Black men here. So it's like, is that sacrifice, that few extra, you know, thousands worth kind of my personal priorities? And so I think companies need to think about that and meeting people where they are and not expecting everybody to go to the New York, you know, or whatever the hot spot might be for your industry. But find the people in Baltimore, right? Find the people in Durham and Charlotte. Find the people where they exactly are and create spaces. Like, companies make too much money to not be able to open, like, they have it. It's just selective. And again, their communities, the majority, are often comfortable in those places. And so that's who they are, you know, appeasing to. And it comes at a cost for women of color.
Yeah, I went to Facebook. I went to a one-day seminar there, and I was like, oh, this is really, really nice. Like, when I got there, and as I like continued to just walk around, I was like, oh, I couldn't live here. Oh, no.
No, ma'am. No, and a $4,000 one bedroom on top of that.
Yeah. I was talking to a few. I saw like this group, and I was like, so I saw a group of Black girls, and they like ran up on me. They were like, "Did you just move here? Do you work for Facebook now?" I was like, "No, I'm actually here for a conference." They were like, "That's why it's so many Black girls here," because they were so excited. And I was like, "So y'all know all the Black people that live here?" They were like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh yeah, never."
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't even know people by name, right? But I would go to parties. Like, after about my 5th party, it was just like a rotation. Like, oh, hey girl, I don't even know you, but we've been to the same parties, so now we friends. It's like that in the Bay. And that's, again, where wealth is built. Like, you can join a pre-IPO, so basically a private company before they've gone public. And that's how people make all these millions to live there, right? Because you get all these stock options and all these things. Like, wealth is truly there, and that's why it hurts me to know that we aren't there, right? Because it is not created for us to be there. It's intentionally uncomfortable. And so I think that's what companies need to do. When I was at Pinterest, that was one of the conversations I had with the CEO, Ben. They were trying to open a Denver office, and I was like, no, we do not need a new location in Denver. That's San Francisco 2.0. Like, again, what about DC? What about Chicago? What about this? What about that? Because that's where we are.
Nice. Ladies, anyone on here ever dealt with any situations where maybe they felt held back by their employer? Are they struggling with kind of moving up in the ranks within their job or even in their business, that you kind of want to just launch off to Sydney for any questions? Because as you see, she's been around the world and back, and has probably faced a lot of things in her short span of professional experience. But I just want to make sure that you all have all your questions and things like that answered. Sydney, What is the next question? Sorry, my computer died.
All good. It
Okay.
is, you want me to answer, what advice would I give to someone seeking a new position that is typically given to more seasoned employees or opposite sex?
Yeah.
Hands down, this is again how in, I guess, 7 years, how I went from entry level to a leader at a tech company was because that did not stop me. When I applied to the role at Pinterest and became a chief of staff, like a 25-year-old chief of staff is like unheard of, but it was because I ignored like what I saw on the job posting, right, or what people said, and I just showed up, and I showed up every day, and it's like, I'm good. And I had to stand and be very confident and do that. So my response to anybody that's looking for a new position is to approach it that way, to be very strategic. I mean, we have so many tools and technology, LinkedIn, all this. Stalk the people, the companies, you know, the area that you want to work with, and work with them, right? See them at the conference, meet them, talk to them. Like, you have to approach it as if you're trying to be on Making the Band. Like, I like to think that that's like my personal model. If I got to walk across the bridge to Junior's to get the cheesecake, then that's what I'm doing. Because once you're in there, then that is, again, where things take off, right? I probably wouldn't have got this role at Microsoft if it hadn't been for Pinterest. I probably wouldn't have got the role at Pinterest if it hadn't been for IBM. Unfortunately, it's the corporate environment is very much so in crowd, right? People look at that. What school did you go to? Where have you worked? To kind of assess, right, the caliber of who they think you are. And if you don't necessarily have those qualifications, or you're feeling like you might be beat out, I think you meet people and you show up. And that doesn't mean you know, the cold kind of, can I pick your brain messages you might send, or can I get, you know, 30 minutes on your calendar to talk to you about the day-to-day. Like, hit that person up with intentions, right? Because those, when I get those messages on LinkedIn, as much as I would love to respond, like, I just don't have time. But the person I do respond is when they're like, hey, I know you used to be at Pinterest and you did this. I'm really curious about how you all are thinking about the indigenous communities in New Zealand. And I look at that like, dang, like, that's a good, like, that I hadn't actually thought of, like, this is somebody that I would want to talk to. And then if we get on the phone and you're talking nice, you might have a job, right? And it happens.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, my role was not created before. And so I think that that's the thing I would do, is like to really study it and to like give it your all. Don't let the job requirements kind of sell you out. Obviously, you can't apply for the CEO role if you never have done this before. But I would say if something says, like, for example, 10 to 15 years experience, I think you really can go forward at about 7. Like, I really think about things in half lives, like, because that's all written up by recruiters and it's arbitrary.
Right.
Ignore that. I think a lot of people sell themselves out and sell themselves short, rather, when they see that and it's like, oh, but I don't have the finance degree, right? Or I don't have this. Okay, but you have, you know, in your side hustle worked and did all this budgeting, you know, whatever. Like, this is how you show up and show that. I think that's really important.
You said something and it literally like lit a fire. Pick your brain. That is probably the worst line that you could send someone if you are trying to network with them.
Mm-hmm.
Those messages usually get left on read. And it's not because I'm just like, I guess you can say I'm being slightly like intentional by not responding, but I don't think you have a concrete question for me. You just literally at that point want to know my full processes of how I do everything.
Yes.
And I think that that's fine to want to know that, but it's a way that you go about it. And just literally saying, I just want to sit down and pick your brain because I'm trying to have a conference. And I'm like, no, you literally have to be very specific, like you said, of exactly what it is that you want. And it needs to be kind of out of the box per se, because people are probably going to ignore you when you use the word picture brain. It sounds like you're unsure of what it is you even want to do and how you want to do it.
Absolutely. And I think that, like, my brain costs. Like, Microsoft pays me for my brain and they pay good money. So you're going to have to pay too. Cool. You can pick it, but it's going to cost. Like, this isn't free, right? Especially if we have no connection. You know, it's different if you're a friend, right? Or something like that, a degree of separation, but absolutely. And I think that also being mindful of people's time. Like, I've had folks want to put time on my calendar for, you know, 45 minutes to an hour. Like, I don't have that kind of time. tell me when you hit the 10, 15 minutes, I'm more likely to take it, right? And make sure that you have thought out the conversation so we can get in there and get out. You know, offer to take me to coffee. I think that people don't think about that. Like I personally love coffee. So I will pop out of, you know what I'm saying, the office and go meet somebody, right? Because you're showing initiative and doing those things. And I think it's really important for people to know how to network well. And especially, you know, during this time of the pandemic, this is a great time to digital network. Because everybody's at home, right? Everybody's checking.
And they got their phone in their hand.
Exactly. So this is the time to do it and to have the conversations and to build it, even if it's not for right now. I still network, right? And I still idolize and look at people and go, okay, you know, have soft little conversations here when I see her at the conference. Hey, you know, I continuously do that. Like it doesn't stop. I think when you've reached a certain point, it's evergreen because you have no idea, you know, who they might know or when again. Right. Loop around later, and next thing you know, they're the hiring manager for the role you want, and you didn't go up to them at the conference.
We got a couple of comments that came through. Jakia said Aggie pride, but we're going to ignore that one. And then she also said one of her PMs, who is a woman of color, told me that women of color have to market ourselves. Maisha said that she's a talent acquisition manager for a Fortune 5 company. The secret is networking with the right person. When networking, be knowledgeable about what you are interested in so that it is more of a conversation. Mm-hmm. And pretty much agreeing to everything, you know, everything that you actually had said.
One more thing I'll add real quick that I also get hit up about. I know this wasn't the question, but I think it's important is like, people will ask me what opportunities, you know, we have at Microsoft, or are y'all hiring? Which I'm like, come on. And I think that too, Maisha, I think what she's saying, right, is that research, right? So you should, it's Microsoft.com/careers. I mean, that is for most companies, like already know that role, right? Or maybe tell me that I don't see that the role exists, but I think that, you know, do your research. You all could really benefit from, you know, X position, and I'm the right person to be able to provide those skills. Like, I think, again, it's so important. And back when I was doing like HBCU recruiting, I used to have so many moments where I would pull the kids to the side who would come to the table and be like, what's IBM? And I'm like, you came to me to ask me to educate you in the 21st century when we have smartphones on what these 3 letters mean. That's okay if you don't know, but you have to do it yourself. And so granted, these are college students, but I think you have to be as equally as hungry. No one's just going to hand you. I didn't get anything by anybody handing anything to me. Like, I mean, when I got the Pinterest role, I applied to tens of, probably about 50 different roles in Silicon Valley until like that stuck. And so I think that you really need to go into stuff well-intended and well-researched and have, you know, that elevator speech people talk about, have it digitally, right? Like maybe write some prompts. Like I have that. I have different resumes based upon the type of, you know, position, because I have consulting and diversity and inclusion. Am I trying to get a strategy role or am I trying to get a D&I role? I might write those up very differently.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So it looks like, and those are really good points, Sydney. Maisha said, research the company and be able to sell yourself to someone about how you will be an asset to the company itself. And that's a good point. And that's what we talked about on yesterday for the how to prepare for a pitch competition, because we didn't only talk about, you know, preparing for a pitch competition to win money. We talked about actually developing your pitch, regardless if you're a small business or if you're looking for, you know, employment as well. So definitely having those pitches ready. That's another good point. Sydney, I did want to ask you another question because I think that's the last one on the sheet, right?
Let me see. And there was also one more thing. No, it's actually one more question. You asked me, I'll say that in a second. But one other thing I wanted to say on that. Okay. I said the other thing was the last thing, but this is it for real. Is like, don't let the no deter you. And what I mean, because sometimes it's no, not right now. Like sometimes we have hiring freezes. Like there are stuff going on internally that I, you know, confidentially cannot share with you, right? But if you circle back with me in 3, 6, 9 months, like it might be the time. And so I think that people will, reach out to folks, then it's a no, and then they just fall back and go away. But it's like, really, if you stay consistent and make sure you're approaching that person, then that can be like one of your biggest helps. And the last question you asked me was, what am I currently working on during this mandated time of rest and shut in? And I think I alluded to that a little bit earlier, just me trying to make sure I protect my mental health. I saw this meme today with something like everybody's working from home, but it's like, really panicking while trying to work at home, right? And I think that that's real. This feels strange. There are so many other things that are in my mind about, my family, their finances, and what that means with a lot of people being laid off and all this other. So I think that for me, it's just trying to find ways to better Sydney, as well as, this is something you mentioned earlier. I don't have an entrepreneurial spirit. However, I recognize the importance of that. I know I am a 9-to-5er because that's who I am. And I think that's okay. I think that somebody got to work for somebody, right? Like everybody can't have their own company. So it's more like me.
We need y'all at the table to help. It's that's how it works. We need y'all to be at the table, and then we are here doing the work to make y'all look good. So when you spend your money, it look good.
It's a whole ecosystem. So for me, I'm trying to tap into more of that, right? In like a hobby way, right? And everyone thinks like, have another stream of income. I think, that's good, but sometimes you can just learn to do something because you just like it, right? And so for me, to be transparent, I've always loved like handwriting. So I've been watching like these online things of calligraphy, like trying to learn how to do more script and type. And it's just something that like feels good at the end of the day. When I'm done with the Microsoft stuff, I just come and I'm literally learning how to do different strokes in writing. And so that's what I'm working on, is what do I enjoy? Like, what are my hobbies? What are the things that are going to carry me on when we can finally go outside?
I kind of wanted, I think it was something else that had came through. Let me see. Oh, she said, you are your brand, represent yourself. And I absolutely love this conversation. Thanks for the opportunity, Sabrina. You're welcome, Maisha. So one of the things that I did want to kind of hone in on a little bit more was about, when it comes to dealing with, I guess you can say, and we talked about this a little bit with kind of dealing with like microaggressions and different things like that in the workplace. It's a little bit more talked about, I guess you can say, in corporate America. Just curious if you have ever faced any situation before. I know we already talked about facing situations where you maybe felt held back or anything of that nature, but how have you ever dealt with any kind of microaggressions in the workplace?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I deal with them all the time. Unfortunately, I think it's one of those things they're a reflection of our society, right? So they exist outside of work. The same stupid people are in work with you making those comments. And so for me, it's either two things, right? Like I've learned, and I think is, as Black people in particular, right? Like we don't like to snitch. We don't like to necessarily say something. If what you have said to me is inappropriate, I am going to follow the policies that are in the handbook I signed when I signed up at this company. I'm going to tell. And I'm going to tell because I'm hoping that it's going to get you to behave more appropriately, if it is to that degree, right? And I think that I find that often people have grievances and gripes and they talk about it to their significant other, right, or their homies, and don't take the right steps.